Welcome to Rev Real Estate School, the podcast with quick tips and actionable advice to help you sell more real estate in today's world. And now your host, Michael Montgomery.
Hello and welcome back to Rev Real Estate School. I'm your host, Michael Montgomery, and today we're talking about objection handling. More specifically though, we're talking about how you can almost handle any objection out there using a set of steps. Now, by following these steps, one of the great things is regardless of what the objection is, and even regardless of how you intend on responding to the objection, you can follow these steps and basically handle any objection that comes your way. And what I love about this is it doesn't require any sort of snappy language or any very specific wording to use in order to handle an objection. It's more so just following a set of steps. And by following them, then all of the pieces will fit in. Now, here's the thing, is most of us, when we think about handling an objection, the first place our mind goes is how can we basically convince the other person to see it our way? And that tends to not start us off on the right foot. In a lot of ways, we're actually not trying to convince them. Instead, we're trying to understand them. And if we're able to understand them, we're able to be empathetic about where they're coming from, then in fact, we can handle almost any objection out there without using any sort of trick language or anything like that. We just follow a set of steps and then we get to the result. So let's go through that today. And to kick off, let's first start talking about mindset. So we already said two different words or two different ways of thinking about approaching the objection. We said that trying to convince them to see it your way may not be the best approach. And instead, we want to use curiosity and empathy. So when it comes to actually approaching an objection out there, we need to be very curious as to where this objection is coming from. Now, when we think of curiosity, when we think of somebody that's objecting to, say, our commission or our fee, we tend to think, okay, so they're objecting to our fee, so how can we explain to them that our fee is worth it? And instead, we want to be curious. We want to be more curious about where this objection is coming from. When they're thinking about objecting to our fee, who are they comparing us to? What sort of benchmark are they using? What's the ultimate result that they're looking for? Now, we think we may have the answers to these things, and oftentimes we'll try to handle an objection based on what we think they're thinking, when instead, if we just approach it with more curiosity, we can actually handle the objection. We can actually handle the true root cause of what's coming up. And the second component is empathy. So when it comes to an objection, when somebody, if we're coming back to this example of the fee, it's not a cheap process to sell your home. There are a lot of expenses involved with this. So if we're trying to approach this by simply telling them that the way that they're thinking about the fee structure is wrong and they should think about it a different way, well, that's not necessarily true. Selling your home does have expenses, and we should come from a place of empathy. We should come from a place of understanding what they're saying. Another example is when somebody wants to list their home for a higher price. I mean, they've put a lot of years into these homes, right? They've put a lot of work, a lot of effort. They've built a lot of memories. So of course they want to try and sell that home for the highest possible price. And if we bring them a price that doesn't align with them, then it will be jarring for them. And so we first want to just approach any objection handling opportunity with this curiosity and empathy. Now, the other thing we want to keep in mind is that objections themselves are not necessarily a bad thing. In a lot of ways, when somebody's objecting to our service or objecting to our fee, that's a message to us to tell us basically we need to do a better job at explaining our value. So we don't want to avoid objections. When objections come up, it's an opportunity for us to think about, hey, how did we get here? And next time we go about doing this, can we steer the conversation in a different direction? Can we explain our value in a different way so that potentially this objection doesn't happen as frequently? So let's distill this down a little bit further. First off, we need to know what the objections that most people will have, and we have to be willing to actively handle those before they even come up. And so if we know that they're going to object to our fee, then it probably makes sense for us to explain how the fee works, and it makes sense for us to explain our value and the investment that they're making. And if we're just talking about how we're great and we're not talking about the fact that, hey, there are some expenses when it comes to selling your home. If we are just talking about our value, but we're not putting that in terms of expenses as well, then we could end up losing them. We could end up getting to this point where they don't necessarily see the value for the cost. So for that reason, we need to know what objections will come up so that we can actively handle them before they actually end up materializing. The second piece to this, though, is we need to actively seek objections. Now, that seems quite counterintuitive. Oftentimes, we think a listing presentation goes really well when there's no objections. But the thing is there's almost always some level of objection. There's always some question that they have that could be thought of as an objection. But the challenge is they may not actually object openly to us. We may leave their house and then they turn to one another and they have an objection. So if we're not actively trying to seek what objections they have, we're missing an opportunity, A, to learn on how to improve, but also B, to actually address any concerns that they have. So a very simple way of ensuring that we're able to handle any of their concerns, or at least be able to understand their concerns, is to very simply just ask them. So we need to be comfortable asking them if they have any concerns. Do you have any concerns about the process? Is there anything on your mind right now that's holding you back? Now, if you're coming from a truly genuine, authentic place and asking that question, they will bring up any concerns that are on their mind. And that is actually a win. It's much better for us to hear their concerns so that we can actively walk them through it versus have them object to our service behind closed doors. That's one of the worst objections. We tend to call those latent objections, where they're not actively being said. Instead, they are objecting, but they're actually not verbalizing that. So we really want to get to the bottom of that by directly asking them. And so once we've asked them and we start to move into an objection, what are the steps we need to take in order to overcome basically any objection out there? Let's dive into these steps. Now, before we dive in, it's important to understand that there's a lot of different frameworks out there. This sort of structure has worked very, very well for me, and it's really improved the way that I've been able to have conversations with clients. That's not to say other structures out there don't work. This structure just seems to work very, very well. And it works very well because it turns an objection into more of a conversation. So the first step we need to do when we encounter an objection, and let's say that we outwardly ask them, hey, is there anything stopping you right now? Is there anything on your mind? Any concerns you have? And once they've actually verbalized that, the first thing we need to do is we need to clarify. And by clarifying, we need to also not clarify with any level of hostility. Instead, we need to clarify with a diffusing sentence. So let's look at this in more detail. Somebody objects to your fee, let's say. And so in order to clarify it, by also ensuring that we're diffusing any level of hostility, we start with a sentence such as, thanks for letting me know. Thank you so much. I know where you're coming from. Thank you. So we're actually going into the objection by thanking them for bringing something like this up. And then from there, we simply ask the question, can you tell me more about that? And then we pause. And so if they're objecting to the fee and we say, thanks for letting me know, can you tell me more about that? Then they're going to jump in and they're going to say, I know another realtor who is willing to do this for X percentage. And to me, that seems like you guys are offering the same thing, and so I'll have more money in my pocket at the end of the day. Maybe that's where they're going. So then now how you're going to actually handle that is you're not going to fight for the fee. You're going to fight for having the most money in their pocket at the end of the day, which in fact is how I tend to suggest we handle that objection either way. Now, there's a few other ways that we can clarify. Another way, and a great diffusing sentence, is saying something along the lines of, I understand where you're coming from. Our service isn't for everyone, but can you help me understand a little bit more about what's causing this concern? So I did a couple of things there. I thanked them. I said, hey, you know what? My service isn't necessarily for everyone. And then so that diffuses the situation. And then can you help me understand what's causing that concern? And our tonality here is very important. If our tonality is sharp, then we can end up creating more of a hostile environment. I want to take that away. This is not a hostile conversation. Instead, it's me seeking to understand where they're coming from. The final way that you can clarify is just repeating back what they said with an upward tone. And this comes from Chris Voss's book, Never Split the Difference. And he says, you can repeat back what they say with an upward tone, which signals to them that it's a question. So for example, fees being too high, you could repeat back, fees are too high? And when you have that upward tone, it signals to them that that's a question. If you had a downward tone, that signals a statement. So that's another very easy way, anytime actually, to keep somebody talking. Anytime you just want more information, you want to keep them talking, you can just simply repeat back their last sentence with an upward tone. And from there, you'll get them to keep talking because we really need clarification. Now, the next step is validating their concern. And the way that I tend to approach this is using labeling. So when they have clarified their concern over fees or whatever it might be, then very simply, I say that's a valid concern. Regardless of what their concern is, I let them know that's completely valid. So I validate and even use the word valid. That's a valid concern. And then I label. And so, you know what? I understand. That's a valid concern. It seems like you're really concerned with ensuring that you have the most money in your pocket at the end of this transaction. So when I validate and I use a label, the counterparty, so the other person, tends to very much feel heard. When we don't end up actually labeling it, we just jump right into addressing the objection, then it almost seems like we're trying to show them a different way. And although we are going to get to that point, if we just jump right into it, it's jarring again. So instead, we validate. That's a valid concern. And then we label. It sounds like. It seems like. And labeling is such a key part of all real estate processes. So when we're actually meeting somebody and we're going through questions around what they're looking to achieve with the sale or what they're hoping to do when they buy, we want to be using labeling. It is just an amazing way to ensure that other person feels heard. And there is almost instant trust built when we label their concern. The next step is permission. And so this is a really nice transition from clarification to addressing the objection. And the permission statement, there's a couple of fun ways that we can go about asking this question. But the way that I really like is, so after we've validated their concern, now we want to ask permission to overcome their concern. So that's a valid concern. It seems like you're very focused on wanting to ensure you have the most money in your pocket at the end of the day, which I totally understand. Then we move into permission. Can I bounce a few ideas off you? And just that statement, can I bounce a few ideas off you? It's a nice friendly way to then move into the objection handler. So again, if we skipped all of these steps, we would end up moving directly from somebody objecting to our fee, and then we just tell them why we think they're wrong. So although we will probably end up using similar language when the time comes, if we don't do these first three steps, then it's confrontational. It's us versus them. If we follow these three steps, then the next step, when we're actually addressing their concern, becomes a true conversation. It doesn't just become me telling them why I think they're wrong. So I love this line, can I bounce a few ideas off you? I really like that transition point from validation and then right into addressing it by simply asking for permission. And so once we've asked for permission, now you're free to address the objection. And as far as addressing the objection is concerned, almost always, although there's a couple of different frameworks that I will use when it comes to addressing the objection, but for the most part, what I'm trying to do is some level of a reframe. And basically what I'm doing is I've brought them to this point, I've asked them for permission to bounce a few ideas off of them, and then I'm going to reframe their problem or concern potentially as a strength or an opportunity. So if you wanted to handle basically any objection under the sun, you can use a very simple reframe, and honestly, any objection will work with this simple reframe. Once we've got to this stage, we can simply say, can I bounce a few ideas off you? Yes, absolutely. Let me tell you a little bit more about why people are choosing to work with me. And then you can list off 3 to 4 reasons why people choose to work with you. You can actually approach any objection using that exact statement. And then you're not throwing anybody else under the bus. You're simply just walking through why people choose you. Now, there are certain times when we do want to compare and contrast us versus the competition, because we do need to, in certain cases, what we call seed doubt. So we want to seed doubt in choosing a different path as potentially not being the right path. I'm not saying it's the wrong path. I'm just seeding doubt in saying that potentially that may not work in your best interest. But this actually works quite nicely because we've just asked for permission. So since we've asked for permission, regardless of how we want to handle the objection, it actually ends up becoming a lot more conversational because of that permission statement. So although we won't get into a number of different ways to handle different objections, instead just keep in mind that at this point in time, we address their objection, and typically by reframing whatever they're saying as a strength or as a positive. And in the event that you don't have anything to say, so let's just say your mind is going completely blank, or even if your mind's not going blank, you just want a way to handle any objection out there, you can simply use the reframe by saying, let me tell you why people choose to work with me. So whether it's fees, whether it's even pricing or marketing, or you're up against a big team, or you're up against a really big brokerage and your brokerage is smaller. This works for honestly any objection out there. So definitely keep this one in your back pocket when you encounter really any objection, or if you just want to have a go-to way of responding to an objection, you can simply use that response, that reframe. And this brings us to the final step. And the final step is confirm. So we just want to confirm that whatever was said, however we addressed that objection, that helped them clarify their concern and they were able to get to the result they needed. So simply, very, very simple sentence in order to confirm, it's what part of your concern is still left unaddressed. And this may lead into another objection handling exercise. So they may still object, and then we want to clarify, we want to validate and label. We then want to ask permission, and then we want to address, and then we want to confirm again. So it just ends up becoming this cycle. And then once we've actually came to the end, we've addressed it, and then we've confirmed, is there anything about your concern that's still left unaddressed? The answer is no. Then we've successfully moved our way through this framework. And with that, thank you very much for listening to this episode. If you'd like to reach out to me, you can head over to revrealestateschool.com, or you can find me on Instagram at the.michael.montgomery. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next lesson.
This episode of Rev Real Estate School has come to a close. Thank you for tuning in. We will see you back here for your next lesson.